Hey friends, this is Pastor Matt and Pastor Tom from the Village Chapel.
Welcome to Wisdom Years, a series designed to create space for open and thoughtful conversation about how we can apply wisdom and grace to every season of our lives.
Our first part is called Navigating Aging and End of Life Together. And in this episode, we'll be talking with Dr. Eric Sumner, a member of the TVC community, and Dr. Sam Webb, a palliative care physician. And together we'll explore how to have thoughtful and compassionate conversations with our loved ones about aging and what care might look like near the end of life.
Some of the questions that we'll consider together will be, what does end-of-life medical care actually involve? What should our goals be for end-of-life care? What's hospice, and when is it the right choice? And what kinds of challenges and decisions can we expect to face?
These conversations are meaningful at any age, whether you're 18 or 80, and we're so glad you're joining us on this journey. So let's get started. Eric, why don't you tell us about the impetus of this idea, where this idea came from, and what gave you the inspiration to do this?
Actually, it began about 10 or 11 years ago with the death of my grandmother. And then it really came to a head with the death of my mother. And so I remember years ago, unfortunately, my grandmother had a cancer, a terminal illness. And as soon as I recognized it, because I'm a physician, I knew that we needed to talk about some of these things before treatment started. And it became clear fairly quickly that she had a terminal illness, and we started talking about what were her wishes as she was going through this journey. And we started talking about treatments and where she would like to be and what she would like to do with time that was remaining. And so fast forward, and unfortunately my mother had another chronic illness. She had a neurologic problem, and she remembered what happened with my grandmother. And she and I started having these conversations years before this time. And then when it really came toward the end, there were moments such as she would meet a new physician who was taking over her inpatient care she had not met before, who didn't understand the backstory, who would ask questions, and fortunately my mom already had an answer. And so it relieved stress on my father and my brother and myself, because it was a gift not to have to make some of these decisions, because she had made them for us. And so I realized as her time was drawing near and as this time was approaching, that I used to see that, or I still see this actually, frequently at my workplace. But I was experiencing it from a different perspective.
So it'd be beneficial both for someone who is older in age, closer to end of life, to have these conversations with their family, with their doctors, but also for somebody who has parents who are in that season as well, so they're prepared like you were.
Well, I think so, but I'm not sure there needs to be an age limit on it.
Yeah.
Actually, I think all people, unfortunately, it's our, as Jim says, our last greatest enemy. It's facing all of us.
Yeah, 100%.
And so I think that's actually one of the questions I have to discuss is when should we talk about something like this?
Let's start in with some of those questions. Yeah. I'd love to.
All right. Well, Sam, thank you. Thank you for being here. Sam and I work together at one of the local hospitals where I'm a clinical gastroenterologist, and Sam works in palliative care. And he and I frequently see patients in the hospital together and some outpatients together to try to navigate some of these issues that we're here to talk about today. It's an extra training that Sam has in order to be certified with this, but the on-the-job training on a day-to-day basis is real, right?
I learn something new every day, for sure.
All right. So maybe to start this, I guess this is sort of an end-of-life care discussion. Mm-hmm. What is meant by end-of-life care?
So, end of life care, it's not something that I use, a term that I use as much. I'm less focused on what the time is and more focused on what the goals of the care are. And so, usually end of life care is more focused on quality of life, promoting quality, avoiding things that don't promote quality, but also avoiding some of the things that are really tough to go through that probably aren't going to be beneficial at that point. What are your goals? What's important to you? And that translates to all parts of your care throughout your life. So,
Sam and I see people frequently who there almost always is something that can be done for an illness. Mm-hmm. The question is, what are the expected benefits, and is it likely to actually help a person? I don't think patients understand that.
I think part of, at least my experience of medicine, is we're guilty of advertising that we can fix anything, and I don't know that's not true. Sorry to spoil anybody's. Everybody that I've known that wasn't on hospice also dies, so yes. It's not specific. So just wanted to add that as a follow. That's usually my answer to, I said the people not on hospice also die. Mm-hmm. But I think it's more of an approach throughout your life to kind of approach the medical system, because we speak a different language. We just do. We're trained in kind of an odd way, I think, that most people don't have a lot of experience with, and so we look at things uniquely, and so bridging that gap between the way that we see things and we're trained to see things and then where people are. And a lot of times people are in all kinds of different places. Some people are very accepting and open to what's coming, and then other people are very much resistant and fighting, and so it really runs the gamut.
Do you think that there are members of the medical team who have difficulty letting go? Absolutely.
In medicine, we're trained that death is failure, and that's a really that's a setup for trouble, because to my earlier point, everybody dies. Yeah. So you're going to fail with every patient eventually. Yeah. And so that can't really be your yardstick for measuring success or care or, support. That it's got to be something else, because that's just a recipe for frustration and negativity, I think.
Right. So even though a caregiver, a medical provider might feel better that there is a next treatment, if it's unsuccessful or leads to suffering or false expectations, how is it really helping that patient?
That is correct. That is a very good insight that a lot of us in medicine don't necessarily have, and it's worth thinking about. And one of my favorite physicians that I worked with in residency, she was a lung cancer specialist, and she said, "We've got a good plan and a bad plan." So she talked about every possible option at each branch in the tree. When the pathology comes back, first round of treatment, every step of the way, even going to the last step and say, how are we going to care for you when these treatment things aren't working anymore? What are we going to do then? And her patients were prepared, and I thought that was a really, really great way to care for people.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
Yeah. So part of that, so when we're getting down to some of these issues for a person, a term that comes up often for you and me is goals of care, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier. And so what is meant by goals of care?
So, goals of care in the hospital generally means what, from a doctor standpoint, typically means what kind of life support are you willing to undergo to stay alive and keep with the potential for recovery, and that varies. I tend to think of goals of care, really, for most people, it really should be, what do you want your life to look like? What are things that are not acceptable to you? What are things that would be acceptable to you? And you don't always know what those are going to be, but some people, for example, they'd say, if I'm in a nursing home and I don't recognize anybody, that's not a good quality of life for me. Other people are like, hey, as long as I can interact with my family in some way and I'm alive, then that's what I want to do. That's the goals, because you're really not going to get good medical decisions until you have those goals, those life goals in place. In training, one of the key things that I learned was you can't, you really are beating your head against the wall to try to plan for care without talking about what kind of life do you want to live, and will this particular intervention, will it get you there, or will it not? Or the odds good, bad? How much is it going to cost me? And that, not just financial, it's how much wear and tear on my body and on myself and on my family to go through this. And so those are important questions to ask. So I think really goals of care for me, it's less medical. It's more what do you want what are your life goals? What do you want your life to be like, quality of life wise? And then we'll help you as medical folks talk about what the implications of that are for your care.
Which is difficult for a surrogate to determine.
Yes, it is. It is. And so that's another reason highlighting the importance of having these conversations early.
Yeah, Julie and I joke when something happens and say, I don't want that done. I don't want this. And it's an ongoing discussion about what these goals are. And
so it sounds like that first question is, what do I want the end to look like, right? What do I want my life at its end to look like? And then what am I willing to endure to have that? Sort of the second thing they have to ask, right? Because
absolutely,
okay,
that's a great way of phrasing it.
That's helpful to sort of conceptualize it that way.
And I think one of the nuances might be, is the care, is it life saving or is it life sustaining?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question.
well, that's a perfect segue into the question of what is quality of
Excellent.
life. What is quality of life, and does it look different from one person to another? Is it the same for everybody?
Yeah, I think there are probably some people who, and I would include myself among these kinds of people, who would think, okay, well, if I can't communicate, for instance, and exchange ideas in some kind of a meaningful way, then that doesn't feel like quality, right? I mean, that feels like a basic thing, but those kinds of things, I think, are the sort of things we're talking about when we talk about quality. Can I live that way? Can I not exchange ideas? Can I hear but not respond? Those sorts of things.
I love how you gave that personal example, because I truly think it is different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And the goals of care are to try to achieve that quality if it can reasonably be done. And then at what cost?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, there are people who value living independently so highly that they don't want to go through anything that's going to jeopardize their independence. They would rather die than
Right.
not be independent.
Right.
For a lot of folks,
Right.
and so that's something that comes up. I hear what you said, communicating.
Yeah.
Can I be where I want to be? For some people, it's like, if I'm alive and I can be where I want to be, that's cool. I'm good with it. And so it really is kind of a nuanced thing, but everybody's a little different on it. It's not the same. So finding out, one of my jobs in my work is finding out kind of what makes people tick, and then working backwards from that to say, it doesn't sound like this is going to help us get to that, but maybe this will, something like that.
Do you encounter a lot of folks who say, it's important for me to be at home?
Yes.
Is that big? I want to be at home. I want to be with my family, those sorts of things?
Yes, that's probably the number one request. And in our healthcare system, as you alluded to earlier, more people are dying with hospice and at hospitals than we used to. Part of that is because people are living longer with more things now that require more stuff to sustain them. And so you need a hospital. Hospice can be done at home, and it was originally designed to be at home, but people are so sick now that once they get to the point where they're ready to do hospice, the family's like, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Well, people prepare for end of life things in other ways with financial planning and last will and testament. How is this discussion? How is it different than, for example, a will and financial planning?
So it's a little bit more nuanced, I would say. A will, just to be clear, it takes effect when you die. So it's not it's not in effect until someone passes away. A lot of the documents that or things that we'll be talking about are in effect while you're alive. And so that's an important distinction to say, well, my estate's all planned and everything. I'm like, that's great, but what are you going to do while you're alive? So that's important to remember. I think for healthcare, there are other people involved in the decision making that maybe not as much with financial planning or other things where, you say, I want this asset to go to this person. It's harder to envision what the circumstances of your end of life situation are going to be and what that's going to look like, what your capacity is going to be in it, and who's going to be making those decisions for you. And so it's really important for me, the most important thing you can do as a patient is have an advance directive that names someone for me to talk to. If I'm meeting you in the ER, ICU, wherever, I want to know who you want me to talk to when you're really sick and you can't talk to me.
These are difficult discussions. I think we can all understand that they're difficult. But what makes them so difficult?
Well, it's the same reason people don't buy life insurance. That's
Right.
one of the things, it's just, we don't make those plans financially because we live very much in a culture that's afraid of death and doesn't talk about it, doesn't talk about progression, aging, dying. And so I think that comes to part of it, and it's just a scary thing. It's the way we're made.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's family culture too. That I tend to ask my clients, tell me about your family rules, right? Because and everyone knows what I mean when I say that, because they go, oh yeah, those things that nobody wrote down anywhere, but we all knew were the things we could talk about, things we couldn't talk about. And for some families, death's just not something you talk about, and you certainly don't talk about it with the people who are going to die when they're alive. You might talk about it, in terms of past deaths, but it's just kind of off the table for some people growing up, I think.
And we're so removed from it. Many people, I don't know what the percentage is, but many people die in hospice now or in a hospital rather than a home, where generations ago, almost everyone died at home. So death was part of the family conversation.
Right. When should these discussions begin?
My recommendation to people is if you're 18 or older, you need to have an advance directive for healthcare, not just for what your specific goals are, whether you want a feeding tube or something like that. That's not what I'm saying, but I would say naming your people is really important, particularly if your person is not a blood relative or following the legal tree of who would be the person that they'll talk to by law. So it's really important. If it's your best friend or a distant cousin, one of my cousins raised me, and she was like a mom to me. I wasn't her closest relative when she passed away, but I was executor of her estate, but we had to kind of figure that out because they said, well, the next of kin has to do this, and I was like, well, but I'm the person she wanted to do all this stuff. And so we kind of had to work that out, but it's important. I've also seen situations where people have been divorced for 20 years, or separated for 20 years, but they're still married, and somebody comes in hot off a plane and starts making decisions for somebody that hasn't seen that person in 20 years. So that's not ideal.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, so that brings in, so are there advantages to an early discussion of these topics for people, or are there disadvantages of a later discussion?
One of the sort of mythic disadvantages of talking about death is that it hastens it in some cultures and belief systems. Nothing to my knowledge that doesn't happen. So you're not any more likely to die if you talk about dying than if you don't. So I think the earlier you have the conversation, the more opportunities there are to kind of figure out what you want and what you want things to look like. And most importantly, sort of like the rules that you said, what are your family rules? So sometimes it's what you don't write down that's as important as what you write down in the directive. I've seen that with families where, they really wanted to do this and it wasn't written anywhere, but they just knew. And so that doesn't happen by accident, but when you talk about it explicitly or have those opportunities to talk about it, some of those family rules come up and they can apply to end of life just like anything else.
Yeah.
So later discussion is hard because, to Eric's point earlier, you said emotions make everything more difficult, and they do. So even filling out normal paperwork is harder when somebody's really sick. So the human brain does not do well when it's in a really emotional state. And so anytime you can do this in a more balanced, kind of rational, objective state, that's going to work out better in the long run.
Mm-hmm. With whom should these discussions take place?
Good question.
So for you, it was you and your family member. You must have had these conversations at some point.
We did.
And it may be the family rules and the rules and dynamic that you chose that person. I think naturally people think of spouses, parents, children. Those are natural people, but is it those with whom someone is close? Is it their doctor? Is it their church family, their neighbors? Are there individuals with whom it's best to discuss these topics, to prepare?
I think it's good to have a conversation with as many people as you can that are important to you, because the conversation is not just for you, it's for them. And if you can make it kind of a mutual thing where, well, I want this and I want this, it's more about what do you think about this. It really, I tend to recommend talking about it in church, at the doctor's office, anybody that's willing to talk to you about it, because a lot of people just aren't, and it's part of the reason we're here. But I think it's good to have those discussions. I think also when you talk to people about your goals and you're trying to figure out who the person is that you want to make decisions for you, or who the people are, sometimes it's not your spouse. You know your spouse really well and you love them to death and it's great, but they're just going to fall apart when things go bad, and you want to have somebody that maybe it wouldn't be as difficult to make those tough decisions, or that could do it and honor what you would want. So I think that's an important point to make.
I wonder how often, Tom, as part of your job or on church staff, do you hear from people about these type of topics? Has this happened before? Is this an unusual thing that people ask the church family about or their counselor about?
It's not that unusual, really. I mean, especially with the older population in the church. And we have had some folks come to us and say, from a sort of a serpents and doves perspective, nothing's happening here, but we just want to get on the right side of this early by telling you what our plan is and who our contacts are and those kinds of things. So they want to loop their church into all that. So, but yeah, we have had that.
And it is always helpful when you're planning a memorial service for someone in your church, either direct member or family member, to have some of those conversations. Well, this is what they wanted, what they didn't want. And that's typically after they passed.
Right.
But it's still part of the process and part of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay, maybe that's a good segue into some of the legal aspects. So maybe this topic is discussed with a lot of people. What does Tennessee law say about who can legally make some of these decisions?
So there's a hierarchy in most states for doing healthcare proxy, determining who your healthcare proxy is or agent is in the event that you can't tell somebody. Typically it's family. It starts with spouse, usually adult children, then parents, then adult siblings, in that order. So that's sort of the order of things. So you can see where if you're still technically married to somebody, they're your person by law. And so that can be a very difficult situation. So those are the people. Typically it's family. And so one of the things that again, just to highlight this point is when you fill out an advance directive, and I hope people will, if you're a great reason to do that is because if your person is not in that tree of people, but even if it is, it's still good to know who's who and what's what, and spell it out ahead of time so there's not a lot of wrangling and, well, I want to make decisions for mom, or I want to do this for dad. It just, everything gets harder the closer you get to end of life.
Right. But I think part of the goal of having this discussion is to relieve some of the burden from those people, right?
Yes.
So it actually allows that person to be their own agent and say, this is what I want for myself at this time in my life. You notify the right people. But it seems to me, at least it was for my family, it was a gift.
It's almost universally a gift. Almost always. I can't think of any instances where people planned ahead and it wasn't beneficial. So I think you're exactly right.
Because I find that discussion when I'm on the caregiving side of these conversations is, the good news is your family member has already told us what to do. Because it's normal that there's stress and anxiety, even when the decisions are clearly written because of the emotional part of it. And to be able to remind family members, it's already taken care of.
It's already done.
Right. It's already done. Okay. Are there others? Do you think most states are similar? There may be someone watching this video who doesn't live in Tennessee.
Most states are similar. Most of them have a legal framework for choosing a healthcare proxy or determining who your healthcare proxy is in the event that there's not one, or sort of like if you die without a will, there's a process for that. And so generally it is the family, and generally it follows that tree of spouse, adult children, parents, siblings, or some variation on that.
Okay.
So what's the difference between an advance directive and a living will?
So a living will is a document that you draft with an attorney and have notarized. It spells out what you would like, what your wishes would be if you're alive. So what kind of things you would find acceptable, what quality of life you would find acceptable, what measures. It's again, there's a little bit of variation in all of them. And as a doctor, I like the form because there's check boxes and I can just look at it real quick and say, all right, this is where we are. Versus a living will, you kind of have to read through it and parse out the language. And again, most of them are fairly similar. They use templates for those too. But an advance directive or a living will, they're both legal documents that say ahead of time, what are your wishes? That's really what they are. And so they're not exactly the same, but they do similar things. And a living will can also, you probably need a durable power of attorney in addition to living will to have for health care if you don't have that. And that's the reason I like the Tennessee Advance Directive. It's free and it's got two things in one. So it's less documents. I like that.
So by durable power of attorney, you mean a person who's legally able to make some of these decisions for a person when they are unable to do it for themselves.
Yes, and the key distinction is this is all for health care. The Tennessee Advance Directive is only for health care. It has nothing to do with your finances, your estate, your will. That's all separate. So you can do this and still do whatever you want with the other piece of it. But a living will, may have aspects of it that has that. But a durable power of attorney for healthcare, and then there's a durable power of attorney in general. There's a durable power that you would take to a bank and say, hey, this person passed away. I need to do this.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction for this whole conversation is there's a difference between planning what's going to happen to your retirement account and your bank accounts and to the home you live in which you live and your possessions versus what's going to happen to you.
Right.
In the last few days, and then, whatever period of time that is. It's a big difference.
Big difference.
Another common thing that comes up, especially in the intensive care unit, is DNR, DNI. What is meant by that? Are they separate orders? Are they mutually exclusive?
DNR order basically means that if you die in spite of treatment, so it doesn't mean do not treat. Just means that if you die, your heart stops or your lungs quit working in spite of treatment, we don't try to resuscitate you or bring you back to life. You are dead at that point, and we don't try to bring you back, because that's important. A lot of people don't recognize that medically you are considered dead when you undergo resuscitative efforts. You are medically dead. So we're trying to get you back. It's not like we're doing this thing to prevent you from dying, but it's an important distinction. DNI means do not intubate. So that means I don't want to be on a ventilator. Unfortunately, these orders, I don't know that they were necessarily developed by doctors. They feel more like they were developed by either HR or attorneys, and those are fine groups of folks, but they don't always translate to the medical part of it, because if you are DNR in the hospital, you're also DNI more often than not, unless you're in the operating room and you need to be intubated for a procedure and they think it's worth the risks, and it gets really nuanced. But yeah, you can be a DNI. So you can be a DNR, but it's really hard to just be a DNI, I guess is what I would say, because from a resuscitation standpoint and just the mechanics of resuscitating someone, nearly everybody who dies in the hospital of a cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest, they get intubated at least for a day or two. Mm-hmm. And some people are like, I don't want that. I've been on a ventilator before, I didn't like it, or whatever. But it's very nuanced, and it's hard to... The other issue with it is the way it's portrayed on TV. So CPR, it's a great thing. Damar Hamlin, the Buffalo Bills player, that was awesome. They got him back, and he's living his life, and that's an amazing thing. And that's sort of the pinnacle of resuscitative efforts. We saw that. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, most of us are not 25-year-old world-class athletes, right? Who didn't have a respiratory arrest, and that's important to note about him. I don't know that he arrested from a respiratory. It seemed like it was all cardiac, and that's a different thing too. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but really the odds of, I'll give you a statistic that translates well for me. So I'm 42 years old. I'm a runner. I work out fairly regularly. I don't eat great, but I'm a pretty healthy person. If I were in the hospital and I died, my heart stopped or my lungs stopped working, my odds of leaving the hospital alive and awake enough to interact with my family at 30 days is about 15%. Wow. So it's not this thing where you die in the morning, you go home that afternoon. It just doesn't look like that, and it signs you up for a lot. And so that's also important to know, because of course everybody wants to be resuscitated and brought back to life. Who wouldn't, right? But it's sort of a mirage, in my opinion.
And I think this is complicated when these discussions have not been had. Right. And so your family member is in the emergency department or in the intensive care unit, and they come to you, well, what do you want us to do? We can do this and this and this and this. Mm-hmm. And without preparations, there's confusion. The emotional stress is so high. Of course we want you to try to save our loved one, not understanding some of the statistic that you just told, the underlying medical problems, that there may be chronic problems that led to them presenting to the hospital. It's very complicated, and I think that there's just not a lot of understanding by not only patients, families, but also the medical team.
That is correct. And the inertia of the medical system is to do. Right. If there's a choice between not doing something and doing something, it's gonna fall towards doing. That's just kind of how the system works. And knowing that is important, because if you don't want certain things done, it's even more important to say, hey, I don't want to do this, and let the people that are taking care of you know about those things, because the default, would you agree with that? The default is to do stuff.
It is, and I think is well-intentioned.
Yeah.
I think people truly believe that they want to be a patient's advocate and to try to do the very best that they can.
Yes.
But what you said earlier is when it doesn't go well, or choosing not to do something can be interpreted as failure. Mm-hmm. I think that's a significant deficit in the medical community that we need to talk about. There's a difference between failure and maybe what's best, and it may be best not to do something for a particular person.
And I'll bring this up just as food for thought. There was a lung cancer study couple years ago where they randomize people with advanced lung cancer to either palliative, kind of comfort-focused care, or aggressive treatment. People with palliative care live longer.
My goodness.
So it's not just, I've had several patients, this is not a reason I recommend it for people, but I've had several patients where I sent them to hospice, they got better.
Wow.
They got better because we weren't doing all the things. And so they got better because they were at home, because they were doing the things they wanted to do and not running back and forth to the doctor's office every day. So it's not a reason to do it, but it's not this clear-cut thing where if you do X, you're going to get worse. It's not like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are unintended consequences of being treated, such as such as missed time away from home, discomfort with an IV and blood draw. So another family member has to take off work, and then they come, and then there are these difficult discussions. There are all of these downstream consequences of treatment.
Is there ever a time where someone has a DNI on an advanced directive, but you have a conversation with their proxy to suggest, well, maybe intubation would be helpful here because it's not going to be an ongoing thing. I see it as just a temporary thing for a short period of time that will help them recover, but without it, they won't recover. Is that a conversation you ever have?
Yes. Yeah. And all variations thereof. I think, and I also have it where the advanced directive says one thing, but clinically things have changed to a degree that it just doesn't apply anymore. And that's why the part about who the person is more important than what the goals are or what the thing says, even though goals are very important, because in every person's life, you transition from a point where you could reasonably expect to get to this point or get back to some quality of life, and then you pass that point where you can't. And it definitely, so yes, I have those conversations with people, because my approach is, again, I want to do things for you and not to you. If we're doing this intubation for you to help you do this thing or to help you get to this point, yes. Is there a chance you may not come off? Yeah, but as long as we're all informed, that's what I want. Is so you can make a decision with the best information available.
Yeah.
Would this related to this, but do you sometimes see plans in a living will or an advanced directive that might specify things like intubation, for instance? I would like that if it will improve my condition, but not simply to prolong my life.
Yes.
Things like that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And also time trials of things. So I want to be on the ventilator for 5 days, but no more. I want to be on the ventilator for 7 days, but not more, or 3 days to see if it's a pneumonia and it starts turning around, I get better. That's great. Those are really good, actually. Time trials are a big part of what I do, where there's difficulty coming to a decision to say, we're not going to, we are going to do this, we're not going to do it. Just say, let's do it, but let's do it in a way that makes sense, so that we're not just flogging you 14 days in and, everybody's talking about you behind the scenes and saying, what are they doing? So that's a very powerful tool and that I use not infrequently to help people kind of say, all right, we want to do this, but we want to do it in a way, in a smart way, or a way that is optimal. So definitely.